Hello YouTube, Jerry Kirkpatrick here, and now that you have finished making your bullseye pick, the next thing that you might want some information on is the dies, let's call them hammers and dies. Anything that is put into the lower arm that is movable, we're going to be calling a hammer. Anything held in the upper arm is going to be called a die. So all of these will be either a hammer or a die as I'm discussing them throughout the rest of this video. I guess 4 main groups that you're going to need for your upper and lower, your hammers and your dies, are flats that you'll be striking against, a hollow, which is this one and this one, where you'll be striking over air. So if you want a little bit more movement, you can strike over air and peck a piece up above the primary surface, the surface that you're working towards. And we have one for steel and one for aluminum, for working steel or aluminum. And then we have the hammers that go from a fairly sharp pick to a very slow hammer that will work on a nice curved area. Then we have forming dies, and I'll show you these a little bit. This was made for a very special purpose, and you're just going to have to work through. As you work your pick, you'll find out different die combinations that you'll have to make for yourself. And the last one is the adapter I made for using any of my nylon inserts for my air chisel and that hammer that I showed you in the preceding videos. But the only one that we'll be talking about today is this one that has a concaved area. The rest of these we'll be putting aside and only getting into these. So let me get you in a little bit closer, and we'll go through each of these as a group and explain what they do and why there are different lengths of the bolts for their different adjustments. At the end of the video, I'll go into more detail on using different lengths of upper dies and hammers so you can align the position where the hammer strikes the anvil by changing the angle of these two. Preferably, if you have the correct anvil and hammer length set to where they strike at the proper place, these will be horizontal. They will be parallel. But sometimes you want to get closer to an edge or strike farther out on the anvil, and I'll be showing you how to make those adjustments at the end of this video. So let's get in close and we'll go through these hammers and anvils. So the first one we'll get into is this one, which is a special purpose And we'll do that so we can get it out of here. This isn't something that you will need to make for any of your projects unless you get into the same situation I did. This was made for the bottom edge of a 1953 Ford pickup door. And this portion is the hammer. You will notice that it's got a pretty good taper on both edges. The only place it's 90 degrees is right smack in the center. And I have a center punch mark here and a center punch mark here, so I know that they go into the hammer in this orientation where they line up. And I made the heavier part for the hammer because of mass. I could put this right in to a right angle that I was trying to create, and then with the mass of this one coming down, it would form a nice square corner. So that was a special use for me. Just know that if you need to make something for a specific job, do it. Now let's get on to these, and we'll go this section, and then the hammers. Okay, for these first 5 anvils, you'll notice that the bolts are of different lengths, and that's for alignment purposes, which you'll find out why they have to be different lengths at the end of the video here. These are basically just bolts. This one is, you can't see it, but this is just very slightly curved on the top. I just put it against a belt sander and knocked the edges off, and then put a real nice radius on these edges here so I don't leave any marks even on aluminum. The other 2 are just flat. This one I made so you could see the bullseye. This is the one that I've been using for years. This one is basically the same, but with a shorter shank on it, and that is so I can align my hammer fore or aft. And then this one is for getting up close to a shoulder. If you have a formed piece and it comes up to a shoulder, you can move this over, readjust your hammer so it strikes on the edge of this, and you can get real close to an edge. So that takes care of these 5. This one here I use for steel, and I don't know if the camera will pick this up, but this is somewhat countersunk in the center so it won't mar the inside of the hole there. You can use a regular Allen screw, countersink it, and then soften the edge, and you can use just a regular Allen to do that, or you can get a 1/2 inch, 1/20 bolt, drill and tap it, and you'll wind up with basically what I have here. And this one is used for steel, and then I use this one, which is concaved. I use that one for aluminum with the adapter, and we come up with basically, with those 2, we come up with basically the same thing we have here. Now for the hammers, you want something fairly sharp, like that. This one, I found this thing, I have absolutely no idea what it is, but it had a 1/2-20 and then a smaller diameter here. So I just made that radius a full radius on the end of it, and that softened up the end where it's going to strike a little bit. Then here we have basically the same thing, but you can see that that is a much softer radius here. And then we go to almost a flat. So with these different shapes hitting into these different anvils, you can bring out almost any dent that you have in a piece. So now that you've seen different combinations of hammers and anvils, let's get into how to align the hammer and the anvil in the bullseye pick. And I'm going to be using my original, because that's what all of these are made for. So let me get these cleaned out a little bit and we'll be right back. Put some of these in and I'll show you how to align where the hammer is going to strike the anvil. So here we have a properly aligned hammer and anvil. The bolt length is correct. You can see I have plenty of thread into the upper nut, and they're adjusted to the proper length here and here. That amount of stick out where my arms are pretty much parallel. This one is open just a little, but that's where I can get these to line up as I'm striking. So let me show you one that is totally out of the striking range by just lengthening this bolt here. Let me change these dies and I'll be right back. So here we have a bolt that is much too long. It's sticking way out too far. This arm is having to be opened up by the adjustment here, and you can see there that it is striking way off center. It's still striking in the center this way, but because the distance that we have sticking out is quite improper, unless of course you want to get back next to a flange or something. So you can still use the tool, but you won't be striking down through the center of that bolt head or the bolt itself. So that gives you an idea how far off you can get if the length of the hammer and anvil are not matched, so you can bring these two arms parallel. And here you can see that I have a very short anvil in here. When I bring the hammer up, it is hitting square here, but it's way this side of center. So I guess what I'm saying there is the length of both the upper and the lower This should be right around in there with that adjusted right about there. And that will give you some parallel jaws, and make sure that the hammer is hitting in the center of your die, the upper portion of whatever you're striking against. And that becomes more apparent when you're trying to hit in the center of a depressed area like that. So I hope you got some good information about how to arrive at your hammers and dies, and how to choose different lengths of your hammers and dies to make sure that your arms pretty much stay parallel. Sometimes if you have to reach way in under a piece, you might be stuck with using a longer, lower hammer in order to pick around a corner. But you now have the information, so when you change the length of either the upper or lower die, they pretty much have to be matched to strike in the center in both directions, if that's what you're wanting. If you're using a smaller piece like that, you may want to be hitting right on the edge, and now you know how you can bring the hammer in or out just by changing the angle of the two arms and then making your adjustment back here. So thank you very much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and ring the bell. I do love coffee. See you later.